Hello, it's Tuesday, April 9th, 2019 at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Marketing Live. I'm your host, Kin Sagepal, short for Kinnery, but you can call me Kin. I serve as the Assistant Vice President for Marketing and Branding at the Rochester Institute of Technology in upstate New York, where spring has finally sprung, and I could not be more excited. On today's live broadcast, we're talking about the often forgotten, the significance of marketing, not just PR, in crisis situations. Marketing Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. All of our episodes offer you direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Be a part of our live broadcast by sharing your knowledge. Participate in today's discussion by tweeting us using the hashtag HigherEdLive. Today's live broadcast is powered by Platform Q Education's Conduit online engagement platform. Learn how to integrate continuous online engagement into your marketing and enrollment plans using Conduit. Visit platformqedu.com. All of our episodes are recorded. They're free and easy to access in the video archives at higheredlive.com, or take Higher Ed Live with you on the go by subscribing to the podcast. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. 2 rows of navigation, a carousel, 3 news items, 3 events, 3 alumni profiles, a social media aggregator, and a fact footer. Look familiar? Sound familiar? Ever hear someone say that you could take the logo off your website and it would look like every other institution out there? If you're cringing or laughing nervously, this free M. Stoner webinar on Wednesday, April 24th at 2 p.m. ET or 11 p.m. PT is for you. We'll arm you with the tools that you will need to make your website redesign, starting with your homepage, distinct and compelling. We'll be tweeting out a link to the registration page shortly. All right, so now let's get on with the show. I'm pleased to welcome Carol Keys, Associate Vice President of Marketing at University of Virginia. We've been LinkedIn and Twitter friends for some time now, and we bumped into each other at many conferences. And higher education is such a collegial environment. And even though UVA beat my alma mater, Purdue, in the Elite Eight, I'm still very honored and proud to have Carol join us today. Carol is also gracious enough to lend her time today, speaking of basketball, after a phenomenal night at the NCAA, where if you missed the news, UVA took home the championship trophy. Congratulations to the university and the team, well deserved. For those tuning into live, don't hesitate to ask questions using the hashtag HigherEdLive. I'll do my best to ask your questions as they come in, but first I'll start with a few questions of my own. Carol, first off, congratulations on the NCAA win. How has the buzz been? I know it's only less than 24 hours and you haven't gotten any sleep. You said your team went home at 5 a.m. this morning. So how do you feel today?
We're feeling great. We're feeling great, Ken. Thank you so much. It's the first time in our history that we've taken home the championship. So it's really a special day for my Wahoos and my Cavaliers. Your team, Purdue played a great game. So I have to say, when we get to that level, everyone's watching the best of the best. And it's just been a delight. Don't think I have many fingernails left. It's quite a series of nail biters those last few games. But here representing and just proud of my guys. And the buzz has been great. I think our students and our faculty and our staff, the whole community, really, honestly, has been just filled with delight and joy. And I think we've had a lovely weekend and a lovely evening and morning, just really feeling that sense of pride and ownership. And there's that brand again, but really feeling like we sort of stepped into it. And nothing bad happened and nobody got too excited. So there's also about crisis management. Sometimes that happens, but we had a wonderful evening.
Yeah, it's funny how sometimes good news can also make you feel like, okay, don't get too excited too fast. So kind of just watch what you're doing out there. So, but congratulations. And you're obviously sporting your school colors. I can see that. And so that's very evident that you're feeling the pride today. Um, so before we switch to marketing during crisis situations, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about what you have been doing or are planning to do. And I know it's still very early in the game, no pun intended, during times of this incredible good fortune that you had last night. And how are your plans, marketing plans evolving, and how are things shifting? Or are you just going with the flow? Anything that's standing out?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think those of us involved in marketing and branding are really here to develop and continually merchandise a narrative, right, that's true and compelling. And so right now we're less than 24 hours away from this event, so we're not there yet. But one of the things that we've been deliberate about is partnering with athletics to bring the athletics part of our story into our natural and native storytelling and content development, so that when we're in these moments that are really positive, or when we're in moments where we are handling issues, we have not only a relationship that's built on trust that we're not trying to create on the fly, but that when we're talking about the university's story, that we're really talking about it holistically. And then we're not saying, well, the academics are over here, and also we have some sports teams. And I think that that is often a challenge for those in higher ed, because athletics and academic enterprise often don't kind of grow up together. And so you get this sort of, well, here's our athletic franchise and kind of our athletic brand, and here's the academic brand. And there's not a lot of cohesion, sometimes not even a lot of affinity between those two things. And I think we're really fortunate and have put in a lot of work to making sure that when we're talking about recruiting the best and brightest, we're also talking about recruiting the best and brightest students. And student athletes. So we're also talking about recruiting the best and brightest coaches and athletic staff. And when we're looking at reputation, the athletics component is definitely part of reputation. You see it today because here we are, national champions. But beyond that, looking more permanently, that is very much part of the profile of a major school. So I think that we have A, put the good work in, and B, been fortunate in the relationships we've been able to leverage, so that we are in a position to tell that story, not just today. It's like, that was great, that Tuesday was wonderful back in April, but to really put that forward as part of the kind of culture and community that we have on grounds, and the kind of talent that we attract to grounds, and have that be part of our toolkit, frankly, and continuing to tell our story.
That's great. And, you know, we can go into a whole different conversation and discussion topic around athletic and academic brands and how they merge or don't merge, and different case studies at different institutions, and how they benefit from each other and or hinder each other's brands, and, you know, what is the right approach and for what type of institution. But that's not what today's conversation is about. So I'm gonna shift gears a little bit. Well, you know, so the one article I read about last night's win, which was from Wall Street Journal, and they talked about the win from last night being a championship and a chance to rewrite your story. So I don't know. So I didn't get too deep into the article, but I think you know where this is going. So what story are they rewriting, or are you hoping to rewrite with this win? And can you give us a little bit of a perspective of UVA and where it's been in the recent past?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting way to think about that that coverage. I think specifically they were probably referring to the UVMC loss that we had last year, when we, as a number 1 seed, we lost to a number 16 seed. And a lot of the coverage today of the win has been about redemption and kind of rewriting that literal story. Mm-hmm. When we talk about brand and marketing, and as we start talking about crisis and issues and sort of the role of marketing in that, I would push back a little bit on that idea. We're not really here to rewrite a story. And I think that that creates a little bit of a trap that we frankly, there may be some arrogance in thinking that marketing and branding organizations can actually author their own story. Brands are not owned, right? They are the sum total of the audience and the constituents' experience of you, and they get to contribute to that too. So we can participate in the storytelling around our brands and in the stewardship of what that story stands for. But we don't get to author them in a business office or in a strategic plan by ourselves. And I think that there's a bit of arrogance or a fallacy in that. I'm not sure if that's what the Wall Street Journal meant, but I do think that there's a caution for me that goes up, that sort of flag that goes up. It's not about rewriting. It's about authenticity, and it's about curating, and it's about listening. And it's about, particularly for the marketing end of an organization that might include PR and issues management, it's very much in being a counterbalance to the time-bound kind of events that all of our organizations go through, whether those are literal issues or moments of great joy or great challenge. And to tell that longer arc of the story. What does the university or what does the organization stand for? Why is that important? What are its aspirations? How is it competing for talent, for dollars, for access to research, for the opportunity to make a contribution to the greater good in the world? So I think those are the things that marketing needs to focus on as a constantly evolving storyline, rather than, oh my God, we have an issue, we have to correct it. And that's, I think, where a lot of organizations fall into a bit of a trap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that the article was also talking about Charlottesville as a city and a moment to rewrite some or frame the narrative around that. But your point about authenticity is well taken, and it's also something that I want to segue into when we talk about crisis and the role of marketing, especially in reputational issues or crisis issues. But before we dive into that, because I feel like we are going too deep too quickly and getting to the serious stuff, I want to make sure we set the stage for our listeners about UVA, about you, your organization, and how are you structured? How does the communications arm work with the marketing arm? Are they two separate entities? And if you can shed some light on that before we talk about some of the strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in this position for 5 years. When I came in, we were really just building a marketing and branding, brand stewardship part of the organization where none had existed before. So we had the opportunity really in 2014 to start building what we thought would be the sort of modern, best practice driven marketing organization and communications organization for higher education. And we had 3 verticals. We now have 4. We had marketing, we had news and content, and we had issues management at the time. We now actually split off creative as its own 4th vertical. So we have creative, marketing, content, including news, and issues management. But the division of labor in both of those models was really important in going through how we operationalize a response to a crisis or issue, so that having that dispersion, I guess, of responsibilities, those clear swim lanes, allowed us to weather a number of really high profile issues and crises over the last few years, where 1 or 2 of those areas might be heavily involved in the moment, and then the 3rd or 4th was able to continue to do the work of the university on a daily basis and continue to provide counterbalance, but also, frankly, to keep the trains running. And I think some of the caution when one person or 2 people have all of the responsibility for marketing, PR, issues management, news, is that you can't actually do that. In order to kind of address what needs to be addressed with the issues management, you tend to stop everything because it might be a bandwidth issue, or it might be a roles, combination of roles issue. So we have that structure in terms of having that division of content and news, creative, issues management, and marketing. And I think it has served us extremely well in being able to provide again, counterbalance and a division of labor that allows us to respond both long-term and in the short term to the crisis at hand or to the issue. It doesn't have to be a crisis. It can be a positive, to your point. It can be something that we're responding to right now, but we still have advertising in the market, even right now. So we have a full campaign running that I'm not stopping because in this moment we're adding additional heft and leverage and time to the moment that we're in.
Mm-hmm. And so just to expand on that a little bit, so you have the 4 verticals. Are you so do you oversee the marketing vertical then, I assume?
Yes, yes. So my role as AVP is to oversee marketing, and it includes market research and business intelligence, market programming that would include paid advertising. It would include marketing programs that are supportive of admission and of strategic initiatives and efforts and programs across the university. It also includes digital and digital strategy. So those are my portfolio.
Okay, and social media falls under your portfolio as well?
Social media actually does not. It falls into content and news. And I think that that is an interesting area, and it often falls, sort of any which way in an organization. They are a very strong unit. I think they do an excellent job no matter where they would be in our organization. And I think that it's anyone's call where that belongs. It depends on the organization and how that organization is structured. For us, it's working perfectly within the news organization. I think that there's cycles being closer. In marketing, we tend to have longer cycles for development. There's obviously, we have a daily that we put out, and for social is, in the moment. So that's where it's evolved. That's a good question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I can echo that sentiment too, where social media can span functions because there are so many roles it can play depending on whether you're pushing out content or you are monitoring situations for potential issues, or you are using that as a platform, as a tool for any paid media and things like that. So I can certainly relate. So so now that we have some understanding of how you're structured, tell me a little bit about then, how you function with, say, a vertical such as issues management and others, and news and content, etc., in situations where you have some negative press or negative reputational issues. And we don't have to get into the specifics about any of the issues that may have surfaced to the forefront in the recent past, but if you want to use some examples, even loosely, to help illustrate some points, that would be helpful.
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that came out of the conference that you and I attended around this topic was that marketing is often not thought of in that crisis management moment. So though the organization tends to turn immediately to the spokesperson or to the PR, either firm or in-house person, or to the news and editorial team in terms of handling the media. And all of those things are important, and they're all more important in terms of the order of things than marketing is. But I think there is a real value in what marketing can bring to the table in those situations that has to do with context and understanding brand equity. I think the moment that you're in the effort to manage and understand the impact of that moment on your brand equity, all of us get lost, right, in the data and the funnel that is the immediacy of that moment, whether it's social media, what's happening, what are people saying, what's the sentiment, how are we looking at that, how bad is it? You have board members who are usually called by constituents, and then they're often calling the administration and getting a sense of, I'm hearing people upset, or I'm hearing this, or I'm seeing this article that came out. What are we doing to actually respond to that? And I think what marketing can do in those situations, other than listen, is to provide context to what is our baseline for brand equity, brand strength, brand perceptions between different audiences. How do alumni feel about the university? How do parents feel, not in this moment, but longitudinally? So that when we do have incoming data that speaks to a particular moment in time, we can contextualize that with what we've seen over 3 or 4 years. And so I think that's incredibly important tool that really the marketing and market research arm can provide to leaders in moments that without that data could really have an exaggerated or a skewed view of what the current standing or profile is of the brand in the wake of an issue or a crisis. Not to say that it would be better or worse, but without that context, it's terribly hard to measure. And certainly time is your best ally. So that over time, you can then see, as you retreat from an issue, you can actually see and measure again, what were the lasting impacts, if any? Are there important differences between what your alumni might have felt in reaction to a moment versus what students might be feeling? Those probably are different data points, and they probably are going to suggest different remedies, if there are remedies, and different kinds of understanding or outreach that administration might want to take, if they take any. So it seems like something that seems fairly obvious when I say it out loud, but it's surprising to me how new and different that feels. And I would encourage those listening, if we don't already have a robust brand measurement program, to put one in place as really a tool for the better understanding and management of issues and crises. It's one of the things that marketing, I think, can do best in those situations.
Thank you for that. Yes, I mean, that is such an important point, and also a big reason why we are doing this today is the fact that marketing is sometimes either not thought of at first, or it's thought of too late, or not thought of at all. And so it's imperative to understand where the roles within the function fit, and also the order in which they can be operationalized. So we actually have a question from Twitter, which I would love to field right now. And this is this sort of relates to just working in collaboration and with other verticals, to the earlier point that you mentioned. So Todd Sedmak, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce your last name, it happens to me all the time. UVA has an overarching brand and sub-brands. How do you internally keep all working together versus stovepipes regarding, or silos, I guess, regarding marketing and communications? And I think I would like to add the context for this is probably in the realm of issues, right? And how, when you have brands and sub-brands, and how does all of that function together?
That's a really great question, and we could take 3 hours talking about that. if the person answering the question doesn't get the answer that he or she wants on this, feel free to reach out to me. In the context of crisis management or issue management or brand voice, I would say a little bit less of a charged and more of a general kind of category. It's really tough. One of the things that happens, and anyone who's been through this will recognize it, there's a certain pathway, right, to the response of a crisis. And there's a bit of a pile-on dynamic that can happen, where if something public happens, if there's an article or if there's an issue, you'll often have many members of the administration and the organization wishing, with the best of intentions, to make a statement about that issue. And so when we're a school of our size, to the callers or to the person's point, we have 11 schools We have 16,000 undergrads, 7,000 or so graduates. We have almost 17,000 full-time faculty and staff and a whole lot of other people. So we're the size of a small city. So you can imagine when something comes out that people find offensive or injurious, that there are a lot of voices in the mix that want to have a say and they want to provide a response. It's a natural human reaction. The challenge for communications teams is to clearly differentiate and define, hopefully ahead of time, who's on first, whose role it is to speak for the university, what is the communication cascade, and what is the communication network, so that communication leads across the organization and even deans can understand what and who is making those statements for the university, so that we don't have 7 or 10 or 12, sometimes conflicting statements coming from different parts of the organization. So we've worked pretty proactively over the last 2 years to create a network and a communication cascade that's fairly formal, so that everyone knows in that instance, are we making a statement? Are we not? Is the president saying something, or is the spokesperson saying something? Who's made that decision? When will it be made? And what is my role to do? And when you don't have that kind of network, it gets really muddy really fast. Marketing's role in that really is just to participate and to be part of that network where helpful. I think there's also a microcosm, and one of your questions, Ken, in our setup to this call was to talk about what to do before, during, and after. From a market. What does the marketing person do, right? And I would say in the during part to the caller's question, to the person's question, avoid the pile-on within your own communication organization. So everybody wants to help, and because we're in a moment, everybody wants to help. As a marketing or branding person, you're probably not the first or second person in line to help handle that issue. So don't add to that dynamic by saying, hey, I can help. What do you need me to do? What do you need me to do? So that's where creating those protocols ahead of time is so very helpful, and helps to create just an efficient machine with a coherent message where everybody understands what they can do to help and where they should kind of hang back and let the process actually drive the response. I hope that's helpful. And happy to take the other part of it offline at any point.
Yes, Todd, if you have further questions on this, Carol is happy to chat with you further. But piggybacking off of that around, what exactly does marketing do during, one example that comes to mind, and it's pretty prevalent, is, universities are starting to do more and more brand campaigns, whether it's, paid advertising or what have you, whether it's, segmented markets, segmented geographies, etc. And when you're in the thick of it with an issue or with something that is potentially tarnishing your reputation, where does marketing fall, and what types of steps does one take to course correct, if at all, or to keep the trains moving, as you indicated before? And, going back to this whole idea of authenticity, right? It's we want to frame our narrative. We want to be able to talk about our brand in a way that is compelling, that we know to be true to who we are, even though a certain crisis or an issue might have derailed that a little bit. So should we be overcompensating? So what are those types of things that you would consider as part of your strategy in those situations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that overall there is no playbook. I think every crisis is a little bit different, or every issue is different. Some of them are things that you pay attention to for evergreen issues that you pay attention to over time. I think in higher ed, we probably all have a very similar list. And some of them are really issues of the moment. I think that really careful attunement to the issues that are very specific to that particular issue or moment. And to have some discipline and not overcorrecting for that is really important. So listening to your social team, listening to your crisis management colleagues, listening to your news and editorial colleagues, understanding from them where they see some of those pain points. And as a marketing person or as a marketing team, to be pretty disciplined in not correcting for unless needed. So 2 examples of that. One is if you have marketing and advertising in the market, I would advocate, unless it's really needed, and there may be times when it is needed, to actually let those programs run. And there's a couple benefits to that. One is that, the sun does come up the day after an issue surfaces or there's a news article that's not positive about your organization. Students show up in classes ready to learn. Professors are doing important research, and the work of the university is going on. So I think that there is an important discipline and sort of intestinal fortitude, right, that we can demonstrate by saying, actually, we are continuing to tell the story of the university in positive ways and talk about the value and the benefit of that university. The second is that content is a living thing. And I'll tell you why I'm saying this, because we recently just took a look at some of the institutional website content, and it was amazing to me how much it underscored for us, even though we had looked at it just a few months ago, the importance of that fine tuning at really regular intervals so that your conversation with your constituents and your public is really keeping track with the conversation, the living conversation people are having about your brand. And we talked about brands not being, static. They're not owned by us. They're participatory, right? Make sure that you're paying attention to your own websites, to your own platforms, to your own marketing materials on a real basis, on a real-time basis, so that you can make subtle but important changes that keep that content feeling authentic and feeling like it's not overcorrecting or rewriting a story. It's tracking and it's creating a continual, again, authentic and compelling holistic view of the university and its value. And so those are sort of 2 tracks of response or over response that I would just really suggest to my colleagues out there to continue the good work of marketing programs that exist even during crises, unless really, really necessary to pull them, and then really have a view to what your content is saying in your marketing programs and your marketing content on a real-time basis.
Mm-hmm. That's really great advice. I just want to pause for a minute and just mention again, if you have other questions for Carol, please tweet us using the hashtag #HigherEdLive. Okay, so we've gone through a crisis, or we've gone through a reputational issue, if you will, and we've come out on the other side. And we are still there. The sun has still risen, as you said, and students are still coming. What does marketing do to get back if there has been some course correction, or you have pulled back on some activities, if you will? Do you go out with a bang to, again, not to overcorrect or overcompensate, but to skew the narrative, or to make sure that the narrative goes back to being positive the way it used to be? Or do you tread carefully and cautiously and slowly make your way out into the public, into the marketplace? Or is it neither, or is it both?
I think it's some of both. I think that that a lot of that has to do with listening and understanding that time is really your ally in this process. And then jumping into overcorrection usually makes the situation worse, because it resurfaces some of the issues that of the original issue in the first place. So I particularly because marketing is a more it's a longer term game than than issue management might be or crisis might be. I think we have a little bit of the luxury and the responsibility, frankly, to take a step back and to really assess, to listen, to listen to our colleagues, to listen to our constituents, to listen to our audiences, to listen to the data and to say, where are people really feeling, and what is a time-bound or temporary reaction and what is more likely to be a longer-term reaction. And then look at what are the appropriate corrections and, frankly, the appropriate parts of a narrative that are not being incorporated that we really should incorporate. So I'm trying to think of a good example. Often you'll find that, trying to think of, well, I'm going to just sort of go into Unite the Right. So the rally, the Unite the Right rally that was had in 2017, and then the sort of 1-year anniversary events that happened in August 11th and 12th of last year. Part of our learning as an organization from that was really opened up a lot of excellent conversation about our relationship to the city, to bridge building with communities of color on grounds within conversations across our own university, also within the region, within the city, within the county, and being willing to again, listen to not just react and say, that's not us, but come out the other side with a more holistic and humanistic view of our shared experience and what the university's role in our community is and can be, and what a force for good we can actually be. And so that ended up expanding some of our content. We created more content that was more reflective, frankly, of our own organization and our own community than we had had before. And we came out the other side with a richer understanding of our own narrative, of our history, and of the future that we could create together. And would that have happened without that? You know, going through that firestorm, I don't know. But I think it's a good example. When we talk about overcorrection or reaction to an issue, I think the better merit is in listening to the underlying, what's underneath that, and how can your organization be a participant in the greater good, and what is that pain point, and what is the greater outcome, and be an actor in that instead of being a sort of defensive, that's not us, or whatever. Not always possible. I understand that, but I think it is an important aspiration and a goal to think about as we create, again, authenticity and a kind of holistic, compelling brand narrative, that we need to be actors in that, and not just, is it true, is it false, and do we have more pictures of this and less pictures of that? That's superficial work, and people know it. So it's actually not, best practice anyway.
So since you brought up that example, I'm going to take that example a little bit forward and, share what you wish to share or not. But did your brand narrative then with the city or with the community change after that? And if you were doing any sort of marketing and communications, I guess, Marcom activities within the city, and first of all, were you doing something? And second of all, did that change your playbook, for lack of a better word, for any kind of messaging that would go out in the community?
It certainly informed it. I think that, and this is where I think this should be continual work. I think some of the fallacy or some of the traps, again, that we fall into is we have a thing, something happened, we need to react to it. And we do, right? That's not wrong. But I think as brand stewards and as marketing professionals, we are also responsible for continually looking at where our brand is showing up, how it's perceived, what it's saying visually and with words to the world and to important audiences. If we're not doing that on all the time, then we're not doing our jobs. So when something happens that happens in the world or happens in an organization, we need to fold that into our ongoing work of what is our story and how do we continue to tell this, and what is our story like right now, not what is our story about how we were founded and all that, but like what's happening right now in the real culture and community, the people that make up an organization and place that makes up an organization. So in that response, in that example, we did create some assets that spoke to the vibrancy of this place, of this community, because we felt that we had been, maybe it wasn't quite as clear to everyone in the nation that the people who came here actually came from outside Charlottesville. So I feel like everyone felt we had a good thing going here. We wanted people to understand the true nature of our town as well as our organization. So we worked with the city, we worked with the Board of Tourism, we worked with the chamber, and created a lot of assets, including a really wonderful short film that I think had a great deal of play and was really well received. And they've been using it as an asset just to talk about the general, Charlottesville community ever since. So that was a spinoff. It wasn't a reaction to that, but it was something that was a side benefit. And I think more substantially around issues of social justice, we have a history. And I think particularly now with a new president, we are laying some important foundational work to continue getting deeper into questions of social justice, including those in our own history. So did the rally create those? No. But certainly opened up conversations that we were already committed to, deepened our commitment to those conversations, and that does show up in marketing content as it should.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you touched on you actually led me into my next question, which is around some of the tactics that stem from issues, if you will, that are instigated in terms of, okay, we created some of these assets because we encountered XYZ. So could you give us a few examples, if possible, around any sort of tactical implementation? The other one that you mentioned, for instance, was web content, right? And monitoring and tweaking and finessing and making sure that that's reflective of what you want to portray. So are there any other examples, whether it's social media or web or film, like you just mentioned, wherein, you might have actually created some tactics to get to the root of what it is that you're trying to communicate given the circumstances?
Probably not specific to crises or issues. I think that we look programmatically in terms of marketing to support significant institutional strategies and create plans for that and create measurement approaches to that. In terms of looking at our brand narrative and our institutional platforms, that really should be an ongoing conversation and ongoing curation. Can't think of any specific tactic that we created and say this is a tactic in response to a crisis or an issue. Sure. I think things within our playbook that we said this would feel appropriate now, or this is actually put forward that might be helpful in the situation, or these are things that we need to look for more likely as we look forward to creating a piece that we might have done or a campaign we might have done anyway, or we're already doing in many cases. What are the small nuances that are going to be important coming out of an episode where we might have learned something that we didn't already know? So how do we take the creative, right? I talked about content kind of reflecting the moment not the moment you're in, but the living conversation around your brand. Creative does that too. So when you're making decisions about imagery, you're making decisions all the time about if you're doing video production work, what kind of stories are you telling? When you're looking at the editorial board, what kinds of stories are you telling and why? All of those things coming out of in a moment, including a positive one like today, informs the direction of our content focus. And those can provide much better longitudinal responses to episodes that happen in every university at any point, because you should be tracking with again, where your brand is, where your audiences are, what's happening in real time, and allowing those to inform the ways and the places in which you're investing in developing content and story, and how you get those content and story pieces and tactics out. So I think for me, it's less tactical than it is thinking about this along the lines of story and narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a great point. It's again going back to how groups are set up, marketing communications groups, or even institutions with brands and sub-brands, if you will. It is a collective philosophy to follow as to where all are we putting messages out, and whether it's in the PR space or if it's in the advertising space or both. And in both avenues, how can we be cognizant of some of these nuances, like you mentioned, to ensure there is that level of respect to give in to the situation in which you will encounter, but also there's consistency across all the media, if you will.
And I think that's true. And I think the one thing that I might add to that is, for those of us who have the ability to do message testing, if your research or business intelligence portfolio allows for you to do creative testing or message testing, those are also really helpful avenues to engage and kind of tease out, when we say X, how do people interpret that? Not necessarily in response to a specific issue or a crisis, but to say, gee, when we say X about affordability, it's actually understood very differently by the very people who actually are most likely to need financial aid. And that's a real world example. And all kinds of other things where we think one thing, but when we test it, we get actually more granular and more nuanced understanding. And then that, again, should feed back into that narrative and that content to say, it's important, the words that we use. And sometimes we create issues for ourselves or complicate issues for ourselves unwittingly because we're using the wrong language, or we're using language that people find, if not offensive, not respectful, or not inclusive, or not reflective of the reality or the lived experience that they have. And so I think, as we're talking about narrative, like it is a pretty abstract idea, but it really comes down to specific words you're choosing or specific images you're choosing. And that's where, again, I think that the marketing team and the creative teams, if they're together, really listening to what are those decisions that we're making and how are they actually perceived, and how does that help us come back from something or help us present a holistic, an accurate view of our organization, or how does it actually impede us, or even worse, actually make something into an issue where it might not have been, or just not be helpful.
Yeah. I mean, testing is always a critical component of any program. But, if I may add some words of wisdom, if for lack, perhaps not as wise, but, even doing like a pre and post, and then, knowing that, affordability, we've tested that word across multiple audiences and, many academic semesters or years, but post XYZ, where, our issue and crisis revolved around this idea of tuition and affordability or value proposition, etc. Does it carry the same type of connotation? Does it carry the same type of weight? And if not, and how do we talk about those types of things? And it particularly comes to light in, as we face crises, again, for the lack of a better word, as an industry as a whole, with the quote unquote admission scandal, or whatever it is we want to name it as. And I know we did a Higher Ed Live episode on that. What does that do to the entire industry, and how does our narrative also have to change along with the institutions that were impacted, and knowing that the level of trust is somewhat a bit fragile now with all of that going on?
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. And I think that is actually, it's an excellent point to demarcate a moment, a crisis, a news story, like that actual news story, versus an overall kind of perennial and now very front top of mind issue for us as an industry, which is admission and fairness in admission, to the language that we use and the understanding that marketing teams have to apply to their marketing materials as it relates to financial aid or to admission. So even words like legacy, that is that really a word that we want to be using these days? Is it something that we need to pay attention to? Is it something that, I know as we talk about access and affordability, what is the language that we're using that provides, again, an authentic and thoughtful conversation with people when we know that most likely that they're looking at the same news that we are, and that less of a knee-jerk reaction or an overcorrection or a correction than it is the good day-to-day work of paying attention to what you're saying to your key audiences, and to your point, having an understanding of what they actually think if you have the ability to use this chat, so that you're able to speak in the way that you think you're trying to speak to your audiences with effect. And again, coming all the way back to the beginning, that is important information for a president or a board or a CMO to have at his or her disposal if they are in the middle of a moment when they're looking for background context to say, how should I understand the moment that we're in? If marketing teams can bring forward information like perception data or message testing, when we say X, people actually think it's Y, or we found that actually when we say Y, they really, that has a great deal of, that has a lot of affinity there, and people actually, feel positively on this issue when we use this language. That's incredibly helpful to leadership in understanding, again, the moment that you're in.
Yeah, and then data, as we all know, can speak volumes, especially in academia. So leaning more toward that is definitely sound advice. So I can't believe that we already went past our 45-minute allotted time, and I feel like I didn't touch on a couple of questions that I had planned to ask, but I thought the conversation was great. And again, going back to my earlier point that, in higher education, I have particularly found that people are very willing to share best practices and learnings. And a crisis in one case is obviously, as you have very eloquently noted, it can be an opportunity to learn, but it's an opportunity to learn not just for you as an institution, but for the industry as a whole. And so I appreciate your time in sharing your learnings with the Higher Ed Live listening community and those who are watching live right now. Is there anything else that you want to make sure you touch on before we call it a day and let you get some rest? Much needed rest.
I think I'd encourage my peers to maybe have conversations with either their VP CMO or their colleagues to start having these conversations, if they haven't already, ahead of time, to really define the best benefit that marketing can provide in their organizations, which I realize is going to be different from organization to organization. But my guess is that the conversation will be welcomed. I think the moment we're in as an industry is fractious. I think all of us are handling numerous issues, and they're probably the same top 10, where the speed of social media and media cycles in general really have ramped up the amount of time and energy that institutions of higher education have to spend thinking about these things. And certainly our political environment has politicized the work that we do, which isn't helpful. So I think that marketing professionals should offer this kind of perspective and aid to their organizations in contextualizing and providing some longitudinal backdrop to crisis and issue management, as well as thinking about the work that we're doing as a real-time curated conversation, so that we can make adjustments and have learnings in real time and not say, well, that's our advertising program. It's either that or we overreact and we pull everything and we start all over again. Write our story to get all the way back to your Wall Street Journal article. I don't. So those would be the two things I think I would leave with your listeners.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all the good, bad, and the ugly, if you will, and as well as helping folks in the marketing role understand their place in situations such as the ones that you may have encountered or they may be encountering maybe on a different scale. Because we know that that's the age, like you said, that's the era that we are living in right now. But for now, I'm going to let you enjoy some of the positive good fortune that has come your way, and take that and run with your marketing programs on that front. And to everybody else, I want to thank you all for listening, and thanks always to our program sponsor and Stoner.
Great. Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to be on, and wahoo wah.